Relax, Carmine. I got everything under control.
What the hell's going on?
The lights! What happened to the lights?
Ladies, gentlemen, you've eaten well. You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit, but your feast is nearly over. From this moment on, none of you are safe.
The Adventures of Batman.
Welcoming you to the new adventures of Batman.
Welcome to episode 38 of BATMANIMATION, a Batman on Film podcast revisiting the animated adventures of the Caped Crusader. I'm senior contributor Javi Trujillo, and joining me this episode is none other than noted comic book connoisseur and a killer of a pal to Michael Fassbender, Patrick Johnson. Patrick,
Hey.
Welcome back to the BATMANIMATION cave. How have you been, sir?
I'm doing all right. I had a bumpy last couple months, but I'm doing much better. How about you?
I am also kind of in the same boat. It's been a rough couple of months, but you know what? Talking Batman always makes me feel better and gets me excited. So today, on Batmanimation, we often discuss TV episodes. You know, there's so many different Batman shows and different tones that those shows take, but they're usually, you know, quick 22 minutes, you get in, you get out. But not today. Today, we are looking at the animated adaptation of the perennial Bat classic, Batman Year One.
Woo woo.
Yeah. So I think because of that, we're going to take a little bit of a different tact with this one. Usually when I'm doing these, we kind of walk through the episode, you know, go in sequential order. But with this topic, I feel like that's not really warranted. I think if you're listening to this podcast, odds are you've read the comic, you've definitely seen this movie, or if you've read the comic, you've basically seen this movie. You just haven't heard this movie, I guess.
Yeah.
So because the source material is so familiar to people, we're just going to kind of take a general overview this time out. The movie was released on October 18th, 2011, which blows my mind that it's been 12 years already.
Yeah.
The comic was Batman 404, which had a cover date of February 87, but actually was released on November 13th, 1986. And the storyline lasted to Batman 407, which was cover date May of 87, but was on sale of February 12th of 1987. And IMDb lists the synopsis: as a wealthy playboy and a Chicago cop, both return to Gotham City where their lives will intersect in unexpected ways. How's that work for a summary for you, Patrick?
It's pretty bare bones, but I like the fact that it doesn't give away anything, so I'm okay with that. For someone who's never seen it before.
And the cast is pretty, I think it's a pretty top-notch cast. You have Bryan Cranston as Jim Gordon, Ben McKenzie as Bruce Wayne Batman, who later becomes Gordon on Gotham, but we won't mention that show. Eliza Dushku as Selina, John Polito as Commissioner Loeb, Alex Rocco as Falcone, and Katie Sackhoff as Detective Essen, who is, I mean, she's all over the place between Battlestar Galactica, The Flash, The Mandalorian. She's definitely made her name in the genre, doing all sorts of different characters. Then you have your assorted typical voice actors as well that are always in things. Tata Shori and Robin Atkin Downs. It was written or adapted by Tab Murphy, based on the comics, of course, created by Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, and it was co-directed by Sam Liu and Lauren Montgomery. So, Patrick, you're a longtime Batman fan. When did you first see the movie?
I believe I bought it right when it came out. I was excited for this, and I have a an interesting take on it, as in initially I had some issues with it, but through repeated viewings, those issues have diminished over time, and now I love it, and I keep this particular movie in like my top 5 animated Batman
Hmm.
films that I like to
Wow.
go back to from time to time. What about you? When did you first see it?
The same, like the week it came out, I bought
Mhm.
the Blu-ray version of it. Um, and my opinions on it, I don't know, and we're gonna get into them a little
Mhm.
bit, but just to say, I don't think I rank it nearly as highly as you do.
Mhm.
It's not one I revisit all that often, but it might be because it's so good of an adaptation.
Too good, almost?
Yeah.
I
So,
understand.
and part of that I think has to do with the original source material. What's your relation to the comics that this was based on?
I was, I discovered it from a friend of mine who kinda got me into collecting comics, more so than just reading them, to read them and collect them with the bags and the boards and all, when I was probably 11 or 12. I remember he brought a copy of 404, Batman 404, to school, and I was really mesmerized by the cover. And I think I went and hunted down the individual issues prior to them being in trade, and I was just floored at the level of mature storytelling from Frank Miller, and I really liked the gritty artwork too. Now, I had not read The Dark Knight Returns at this point, and I think I didn't even know about it. So this was my introduction to Batman being written by Miller, and I've loved it ever since then. The comic is probably my favorite Batman story of all time. It's the one that I always go back to when I need a shot in the arm to get me back into Batman if I've taken a step back from the monthlies or something like that. Um, and yeah, it's definitely one of the handful of stories I always go back to, and I can't quite get over. And it was funny once this story ended, and the regular monthlies picked up with 408, I think, and they introduced the new Jason Todd. I was disappointed that the storytelling, kind of went back to a little more lighthearted rather than the gritty
Yeah.
realism, which I now just craved. But then again, you got that with the subsequent releases like the Cult and the Killing Joke the next year in '88. So, what about you? What's your story with it?
Well, I think you definitely hit the nail on the head that the storytelling was so elevated by this, and then the next succeeding issues don't quite live up to that, even though it does have an important reimagining of Jason Todd.
Right.
Um, it sounds like I'm not that like I'm close to your age. I turned 12 in the summer of '89,
Okay.
and my first encounter with this story was in graphic novel form.
Oh,
I
cool.
got it at Walden Books, which I don't even think Walden Books exists anymore. It was a bookstore in the mall.
I remember it.
But it had like that old Warner Brothers logo on it. And, I was just excited to have like new Batman content, or at least new to me. And
Mhm.
I didn't really, I want to say this was my first graphic novel that I ever got. I always get confused if it's this or Lonely Place of Dying, but I'm pretty sure Lonely Place of Dying was second because I was confused of why the paper quality was so bad compared to the paper quality of year one. So that was my first experience with the book, and I enjoyed it, but I also felt it lacked a lot of Batman. Um,
I can see that. I can understand
and
what you're saying.
and coming from, like the Yellow Oval era, there wasn't a lot of Batman to be seen in this book.
Mhm.
And while I appreciated that he had more of like the classic original costume, um, I think it took a little bit of a dive for me in terms of like how much I loved it because it isn't necessarily all Batman Year One. Like Batman Begins is Bruce's movie, but Batman Year One I feel like is more of Gordon's story, and we'll get into that later.
Sure.
But over time, and I definitely read this before I read Dark Knight Returns. So seeing like Merkel show up in both I thought was a cool little nod, but not knowing that I actually read them in reverse sequence, at
Hmm.
least in terms of release. Um, but there was the hardcover, and I don't remember when it came out, but it was like a newer version of it, maybe early 2000s. And
Okay.
I was like, I'll get this hardcover. It was the same size as my graphic novel, but it looked nice and it had some extra content in it. And I reread it, and immediately it just hit me differently. And there was something about it where maybe because I was older, I could appreciate it. Not that I never disliked the art,
Hmm.
but all of a sudden, like, it really came to life for me in a way it hadn't before. And I could see why it was so impressive, and what the storytelling techniques he was using were, and why it would evoke a certain feeling, and the power of the images. um just they got more elevated than I had seen or acknowledged before, and I got into it more as like the Gordon detective story. And especially because I'd had so much Batman content since then, like the lack
Hmm.
of Batman in it didn't really bother me as much. um and since then it's been a favorite story of mine. I definitely have gone back and bought the original issues, and then like poured over comparing the new painting, like the new coloring for the trade paperback versus the original art print. And I've thought about getting the absolute that has both versions. And now, didn't you share the other day on Facebook about the isn't there like an artisan edition or something
Right. Right.
coming out? Yeah.
It's pretty
Yeah.
pricey, but you know, I kind of like getting all the different versions of this one since it's so high on my list. So I might break down and buy that too. I don't know, but I have like you, I have the original issues, of course, and I have 3 or 4 um different the graphic novels, and I had one that was signed by Frank Miller. I actually won at a
Oh,
local
wow.
comic shop. They had like a blind bag thing, and I bought it, and it was just happened to be that.
That's
So.
awesome. And I feel like as a movie, this is a strange one to talk about. It's so close to the source material
Hmm.
that it's almost like we're gonna be reviewing the issues.
Right.
Um, what are the pros and cons to that?
Um, well, some of the other, Batman based on animated movies we've seen have taken a little. They had a little more freedom to kind of change the story to give you a
Yeah,
different experience visually while you're watching the movie. This one doesn't do that. The differences are so uh, almost minuscule. Sometimes it's not even worth talking about them, but there are certain differences. But I think when you have, similar to the Dark Knight Returns release, when you have just a straight up adaptation, you have to kind of ask yourself, why not change, it enough so that it's a different experience. The things they changed in movies like The Long Halloween, I thought actually was an improvement to the story. I won't get into the reveal of who the killer is here, for those that haven't seen it, and Gotham by Gaslight. I thought those were both an improvement. And then you have ones like Hush, which changed certain things. And I don't know that that one worked well enough in Hush, but I think that if you're going to do a based on, but part of the problem is, what are you going to change? How are you going to improve this? Because it's
yeah.
such a good story to begin with. The only thing you can really do is lengthen certain scenes. You can add some spice and flair here and make it pop. But it's a tough question as to whether or not we actually needed a straight up adaptation versus a based on. What about you? What's your feeling there?
Um, Back in my younger years, uh, to me, it was really cool to see as faithful as an adaptation is possible for some reason.
Yeah.
Something like this, The Dark Knight Returns, and kicking on with like a Frank Miller trend, Sin City.
Hmm.
Um, are very much like direct lifts, as opposed to like the Dark Knight trilogy, where we see influence from Year One, we
Mhm.
see influence from No Man's Land and Nightfall, just interpreted in a specific lens. Um, and while at the time it was so cool to be like, "Oh, look, it's exactly like the thing I love," but a movie, it doesn't necessarily lend any more legitimacy to the source material.
Right.
And I find my repeat viewings are less,
Understood.
um, on this kind of stuff than like something like Mask of the Phantasm, which has is vague connections to other Batman stories. Um, and it's not like that I think these movies are bad or movies like that are bad. It's just
Mhm.
as time has gone by, I don't think I go back to them as much as I would just like the source material. Something like Year One, um, my fiance is not really into comics.
Mhm.
She's tried and it doesn't connect with her, like the whole reading experience. And if I wanted to share the story with her, it's a lot easier for me to put in this disc and she can get somewhat the same experience as I had reading it. Um,
I have a question for you.
yeah.
Speaking of that, do you think your opinion would be different on this story had you not read it at a young age and we're experiencing it now for the first time, the actual book? Do you think that it has stood the test of time and is kind of timeless? Do you think it's a story like that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's such a strong story in the way that it's told. Um, like I said, like it wasn't something I connected to necessarily when I was young. Like I knew, oh, this is Year One, it's a classic. I'm supposed to read it, and I did,
Mhm.
and I owned it. But it was something that I came to later. And like I said, like this wasn't necessarily like I don't rank this animated movie as high as some other things,
Sure.
but at the same time, when I was watching it again for this podcast, I'm like, this is a really good movie. Like I
Yeah.
really enjoyed watching it. So it's weird because I don't like go back to it all that much.
You see,
But
that's what
it
happened with me too.
yeah.
It's when I revisited the film, it's like I had taken it for granted initially because I loved the source material so much. So there were certain things that I thought like, how could you do this or how could you do that? Um, and we can get into that a little later. But I had similar experience. But it grew on me, and I really like it now. I mean, I
It's
really
it's
do.
such a just a weird story to me to begin with because there's so much that happens in it because it's literally 4 comics that take place over a year.
Hmm.
So there's a lot going on, but it also reads really fast. I don't know. It's just it's how Miller paces it, I guess, that it flows so effortlessly.
Yeah. Would you consider
I
this, does this remind you a lot of the film noir movies from the '40s, the black
oh
and
yeah.
whites with the voiceover,
Yeah.
um, kinda just guiding you through it? Yeah, I've always kinda felt that too, and I'm actually
Y
glad they have the voiceover
yes.
material. However, I have some issues with the delivery of it, some of it, anyway.
That was something I was gonna bring up right now,
Okay.
in terms of, like, the adaptations. The movie here keeps the dual narration of Bruce and Jim from the comic, unlike the Dark Knight Returns adaptation, which cuts it out altogether. And that for the comic experience, that's one of my favorite aspects of that book is Batman's narration of it. So
Right.
while that movie tries to weave in some of that narrative dialogue into the movie
Mhm.
as you know, words spoken out loud, uh, it's something that it's weird to say that, it feels lacking to me. It doesn't hurt the movie, but it's something I miss from the movie even though it's not there. So
I
it goes back to that question of how direct of an adaptation do you wanna be then?
Right, and as we know, we've grown up reading Batman comics where there's, at least when we were younger, there was more inner monologue going on that played out throughout the issues we would read. And when it's brought to a different medium like animation or even live action, you don't have a lot of the inner monologue. You have it here, and you have it in, like you said, a little bit some of the other ones. But this one is kind of unique in that it does it a little more than most. You get a lot of Jim Gordon's inner thoughts. You get a lot of Bruce Wayne's inner thoughts, and it's I I like my issue with if you want me to go ahead and get to what my issue is with
Yeah.
that now is um, when I initially saw the film, I wasn't sure what it was that bothered me about it, but it was the delivery of make sure I got Mackenzie's inner monologue. I thought that his dialogue when he would speak as Bruce Wayne or Batman was fine. I thought it was great, and they were going for a little bit younger voice, so he wasn't quite as mature and deep, and that's fine. But the inner monologue at times kind of read like he was, or sounded like he was reading the phone book, like maybe he just didn't want or wasn't as jazzed to do that. And I've read certain critiques that have said the same. So I didn't base my opinion on that. I just wanted to see if anyone else thought similarly. Um, but that was it. And there's a couple instances where it kind of takes me out of the film a little bit. And I started to wonder, there are certain actors that don't like doing the voiceover stuff because they think it takes away from the scene, and they want the action and the dialogue to move the scene along without that inner monologue. And a perfect example of this was Harrison Ford's delivery on Blade Runner, which he was forced to do and did not want to do.
Yeah.
You may have you're familiar with that story, I'm sure, right?
Yeah.
You can kind of tell in his delivery, it's very kind of monotone. I kind of get that with Mackenzie here. But at the same time, the funny part is that's kind of how old noir films inner monologues were sort of delivered, sort of matter of fact, this girl walked into my office and blah, 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 blah. Why did she have to walk into my office of all, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So it kind of works both ways, but that was my only problem. And if you get past that, then the rest of the film is fine for me. But that's the only thing that really bothered me.
There's a world weariness to those characters in those types of stories where those detectives are stereotypically a little bitter and jaded and cynical because they've seen like the worst of humanity because they're dealing with crime and infidelity all day.
Right.
So yeah, that totally plays into that aspect of the storytelling. Mackenzie, it's hard for me, and it's still hard for me now. I only made it through a year of Gotham, but I associate him with that role now more than this Batman. And anytime, I mean, I'm of a certain age where Kevin Conroy is my Batman, and anytime that there's an animated project, like no matter how good they are, they're always going to be compared to Conroy, at least for me. So not having him do this movie, especially at a time when he was still very active in the role when this came out, it's always like, why didn't they get Kevin Conroy? Like he can change the pitch of his voice. We've heard it in his Bruce Wayne.
Sure.
So he's always working against whoever's playing Batman's always working against that. Fortunately, Bryan Cranston is Gordon. He'd make a great live action Gordon, but he's the one who really carries the movie because I think it's more of his story. But overall, what did you think of this voice cast?
I liked it. Despite what I said earlier about Mackenzie, I agree with you. Cranston is spot on. And I love the fact that he is so good. And his inner monologue, I don't have the same feeling as I have with Mackenzie's because his seems consistent with his dialogue delivery. And I wondered if it would have been different if Mackenzie's inner monologue was delivered in his Batman voice rather than his Bruce Wayne. I think it may have come off a little different if it was a little rougher and deeper, kind of like as he does later when he addresses the people at the that are having the banquet, and he says, you've fed well on Gotham, and he just lowers it just enough.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure if that would change it enough. I liked Selena Kyle, Elijah Dushku. I've been a fan of hers since I think Wrong Turn, maybe the horror movie way back. And everyone else, I don't have a problem. I can't see a problem with You have what's his name? I thought it was Ed Asner for a minute, but the guy that's playing the mayor. No,
Commissioner
no, I'm
Loeb?
sorry. I'm sorry, Commissioner Loeb. Yeah, John Polito, who I remembered from The Godfather. I thought it was Ed Asner until I looked it up.
See, I always think of Polito and, wasn't he in The Crow?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the guy that played Carmine Falcone. He was in The Godfather.
Oh,
You're right.
he was in The Godfather, yeah.
Yeah, Polito was the Crow. You're right. He ran the pawn shop. Mr. Gideon, you're not paying attention.
Yes.
Bam, and then he gets hit.
That's right.
But yeah, did you have any other issues with any of the other actors' delivery or anything like that?
No, overall, I thought they were really, well suited for their roles. Especially, like, I was happy to see, Eliza Dushku get, another chance in that, DC short film that got included with the, Blu-ray. To
Did
get
she
her to
play
play
Catwoman
Selena
in that?
again. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, she's great. Don't see her in
Now
much anymore.
no, you really don't. My first introduction, I think, was Bring It On, but then
Oh yeah,
with my fiance, it became Buffy. So,
yeah.
that's also like, "Hey, she's in Buffy, come watch this movie with me, hon."
Yeah.
Um, do you think that they should have been brought back for The Long Halloween? Shout out to Ryan Lauer, by the way. Happy birthday, Ryan.
When you say they, which character, which
The
actors you referring
cast
to?
in the whole cast, because so many of these characters carry over into The Long Halloween.
Hmm.
Maybe not Essen, but,
Yeah.
you
I'm not sure
obviously
about
have
I'm not sure about Mackenzie, but I will be I'm with you on Gordon, Catwoman. Let's see, Falcone is in there. Yeah, he was good. Yeah, I would have been okay, except maybe I wouldn't. Harvey Dent. I really liked the Long Halloween. Josh Duhamel. I really liked. I
yeah,
think
he did
that's
a
the
great
guy that
job on
played
that
him.
one.
I wouldn't change Dent, but some of the other ones, yes, absolutely, that would have been great. Mackenzie, I wouldn't have as Batman. Again, nothing against Mackenzie, you know.
It would be a nice, um, just like, fan nod in general to have, like, some kind of continuity in a series between year 1 and The Long Halloween. Just I know it'll never happen, but,
Mhm.
because, the books are so different looking, and I definitely wouldn't change the books. I wouldn't have one artist take over the other and redraw it or anything, but it would be nice to see a universe where it felt a little more cohesive in a way. Um,
Is that where your headcanon goes from this in the second part of Batman's career straight to Long Halloween from, or there are certain things in between, like, The Man Who Laughs and stuff?
my headcanon is A Crisis of Infinite Earths. I have so many different Batman stories and continuities running around in my head. I don't know which is the real one anymore. I've been through so many reboots. So, um, I took great offense to Legends of the Dark Knight 100 when I first read it. It was retelling, the first
Robin.
appearance of Robin.
Yeah.
Like, that's not how it happened. 1940 version. And, like, this is and, and then I eventually came to the conclusion that, these are all just legends, and legends
Hmm.
change over time, and you can like both, and that's okay. Like, having Jack Napier kill the Waynes doesn't negate Joe Chill in the comics, or 0 Hour negating Joe Chill for a while until he gets brought back, and whenever he gets brought back into the continuity. So my headcanon's a complete mess.
Well, I hate to admit this on air, but I'm gonna do it. I have that issue, Legend of Dark Knight 100, but I've never read it, so now I'm gonna have to go read it to see what changes they've made.
And it's Denny O'Neil, so I think it's safe to say you'll like it. And the art
Okay.
style, from what I remember, is really, um, really lush and detailed compared to the original, whoever the original artist was. Because I don't know if that really was Bob Kane or not doing that issue, since he just kind of signed off everything.
Yeah.
Um, I
As long
mean,
as he got
primarily, yeah.
paid.
Primarily, I just think of that Alex Ross cover for that issue
Oh yeah,
because it's gorgeous.
absolutely. No argument here on anything Alex Ross does.
So do you think that this is a Gordon movie or a Batman movie, or do you think they really share equal billing?
Well, you touched on something earlier when you said you read it as a kid and you were kind of disappointed in the fact that it didn't have more Batman. And when I read it, I thought there was kind of the old horror movie trope is you don't show the monster that much, so
Oh.
that he's more effective when he's in the book or on screen. I have this movie plays out more like a Gordon movie to me than a Bruce or Batman movie. And maybe that's why it's effective to me is that it is through some another lens rather than Bruce. You do
Mhm.
get Bruce, but he does feel like he's playing second fiddle a little bit. I mean, I know I don't mean to say that in a negative way at all. I think it's effective. But the duality seems to lean more towards Gordon because it starts, I'm not sure if now Bruce has the first line, but Gordon has the last line in the movie. So that's kind of my feeling is it's more Gordon, but I know it's supposed to be equal. What do you think?
No, I definitely would agree that it's a Gordon story. Like, I don't really feel like I've changed my opinion much on that,
Hmm.
but I've just come to love that it's a Gordon story more. And with Mazzucchelli's art, um, leaning into like the dramatic angles and the film noir style, having like the lone cop fighting corruption adds to that noir element
Hmm.
and makes this, a really powerful story, even though Batman feels more like the major supporting character of the book.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think that's okay. I think that works. I think a lot of times in your typical storytelling, you give a different perspective and you get a whole new experience with your character. And I don't think I had that much when I read that first issue as a kid. Let me Can I ask you about a difference in the story and
yeah,
your thought on it? One of the biggest changes is the absorption of Harvey Dent's character into Gordon's character. Do you
yeah.
think that in any way hurt the story, or do you think it was uh, not even noticeable really for the movie?
Well, that was something I was going to bring up because I had made a note that Harvey Dent feels very absent, and
Hmm.
then I thought about that note. I'm like, I think I might be conflating Long Halloween with Year One, um, because I'm like, I didn't really notice. I know he's credited in the movie. Um, it's Robert Atkin Downs, isn't it?
Let's see.
Yeah, Robin
Yes.
Atkin Downs as Harvey Dent, and for the life of me, I can't remember a scene of Harvey in the movie. I briefly remember a scene or 2 in the comic, the Gordon asking him, what he does at night and, like, lifting his weights,
Hmm.
and Batman's hiding behind the desk, but he feels very non-existent in this movie, and I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. Like, it doesn't bother me that some of his stuff gets absorbed by Gordon, um,
Right.
in the book. I don't think it's any lesser or greater for having him in or out. It's
Right.
just one of those things, I guess.
The scene I noticed it the most, and like I said, I was doing a read along, and that's why I noticed it. If I had just been watching the movie, I probably wouldn't have thought about it. Is when Gordon is interviewing, I think it's either Flass or Skeevers. I think it's Flass, and he's interrogating him. Where in the book it's Dent interrogating him, and I think it
Right.
makes more sense that it's Gordon
Yeah.
because you don't get a lot of interrogations from the district attorney. You get deals, you know, that you're trying to work. So I was okay with that. It didn't bother me too much that they wanted to keep it structured around just Batman and Gordon. And Dent may have been, if they used him too much, it might have interrupted that flow. So I thought that was okay. But that was the biggest change I saw from the book to the movie, was his lesser involvement.
Yeah, and I feel like in the comic, he's more of a footnote anyways. Like, he's got the scene in the courtroom at the end with Flass,
Hmm.
but it's not like Dent's really saying anything. I think it's more Gordon telling us what's happening, and we see like, oh, well, that's Harvey.
Yeah.
And the aforementioned interrogation that you mentioned.
Hmm.
And then the scene with, Gordon, you know, crossing suspects of who the Batman is off the list. Like,
Hmm.
for a movie where you're trying to keep it tight and the runtime, like, do we need to introduce another character to have a scene that's kind of like the scene we get with Bruce, which is a better scene anyways, because that leads to his conversation, Gordon's conversation with Barbara. So
Hmm.
I can see why that would be one of the things they would chop in
Right.
trying to cut it down. And honestly, I didn't even think about it as I was watching it. It's
Right.
something that you think of, I feel like, after the fact.
Right. I think his character is important, though, to keep in even the small amount of time he was in there, because it's a device to show you how Batman is getting some of his intel,
Yeah.
since he and Dent are, I don't want to say in cahoots, but they are working together. And I will say that Batman hiding on the window ledge, I thought, was an improvement over him cowering behind a desk. You know what I mean?
Yes. I I would agree with that. Yeah. It
That
definitely makes him a stronger character.
right.
And I mean, I feel like Harvey's an important character, and I like seeing him being at the beginning. I think that leads to stories down the road where you can establish that dynamic.
Hmm.
But for this confined in a bottle solo movie, like, it in the long run, it doesn't hurt the film by omitting a lot of his material.
Right.
But in the grander narrative of, monthly comic books, it's definitely a benefit to that.
Right.
In
Were there any
terms of
other
the
changes? I'm sorry, you go ahead.
Oh, no, no, go ahead.
I was gonna ask if there are any other differences between the book and the story that, that you thought, you know, were an improvement or, a detriment to the story?
There were a couple moments, that were just little touches that I liked, little embellishments that they added.
Mhm.
Um, Gordon having more of a reason for leaving Gotham. They briefly flesh it out a little bit, that it had to do with internal affairs and how he was
You mean Chicago?
Chicago, I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No, you good.
How, it was because of how uncorruptible he was, like, he kinda had to leave that place because of how he was being treated, um,
Right.
for doing the right thing.
Mhm.
And also, um, when Bruce saves Jim Jr. and Gordon's like, "I can't see anything without my glasses." Like, they give you a look at Bruce, who's still in shadow, but he has, like, a little smile at the corner of his mouth.
Mhm.
And I think it makes it more questionable as to whether Gordon really can't see him without his glasses, or if he's just saying that out loud to be
Like he
like,
knows.
"Yeah, wink, wink. I know you're Bruce Wayne, but I can't," just saying something
I
so they
didn't think
can
about that.
have
That's
that
interesting.
relationship.
That's very interesting. That maybe Gordon knows all along. Wouldn't that be a nice twist to have? That I don't know that we've seen that in any Batman lore. It may have been done, but that would be great if he's like, you're not fooling me. I'm a detective, first and foremost.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What were some of the things that stood out for you?
Well, there are a couple things that are lengthened and changed, like the fight sequence with Catwoman when he first goes out on the his first night. She is just as dangerous as Batman is, and it fights him to a standstill. Whereas
Yeah.
in the book, she throws one karate kick, he blocks it, and knocks her out with one punch. What did you think about them making her essentially as tough as he was?
Um, for this point in their careers, I liked it. I had to note that I thought the fight choreography was very quick and very fluid.
Mhm.
Um, so I appreciated that they had more of a back and forth, even though he should have been training all this time and should be more of a master than she is. I like that they had at this point when they're still rookies that they
Mhm.
had more of an even back and forth.
Right. I didn't mind it. I thought it let the scene breathe. It gave it a better impact, especially visually from book to this movie. And if we're you know if people that have read Catwoman and My Sister's Keeper, and I believe she's being trained by Wildcat in that book to fight. At least that's one of the interpretations of Catwoman. I can see that. Not that the not that you're if someone were seeing this for the first time in this story, I guess it wouldn't matter to them, but it made sense in my head if I'm to include Catwoman, her sister's keeper, in my head as to why she's so good or so dangerous.
I actually just acquired that not too long ago, a trade
Oh,
paperback, but I haven't had a chance to read it
whoops.
yet. Well, I
Whoops, I'm
there's
sorry.
also been other series where, it's been implied that, Catwoman trained with Wildcat. There was like a Batman Wildcat crossover, I think in
Mhm.
the '90s,
Okay.
that also hinted at that. It was like a three-part thing. So you're not spoiling anything for me.
Okay. I'm
But,
sorry.
I did that was one of those things where I came across it at my comic shop. I'm like, "Oh, yeah, I could read this on DC Universe Infinite," but it was just kinda cool to get, like, an older graphic novel with, the older trade dress, and sometimes it's just nice to have a physical copy of something.
Yeah, and I
So,
remember that story being kind of a companion piece to Year One, and it was for mature readers, so it, it had sort of a suggested for mature readers only thing at the comic shop. So you may not have been able to buy it if you were too young, if the comic shop guy didn't want to sell it to you. So it was another one of those mature storytelling that I really enjoyed it along with Year One. So I think if you haven't read it, I think you'll enjoy it.
I'll
It goes for
definitely
anyone listening too, if they've never read it. It's a good story.
and we're back. Was there anything else that stood out to you in terms of changes? I know there were a lot of dates that for some reason didn't match up. Did anything else catch your eye?
Um, no, well, there's small things like when Bruce is training, he kicks the tree to break it, and he's training in his yard. It's one kick in the movie where it's two kicks in the book. Little things like that, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's no way I would have realized had I not been reading along, that it was two kicks in the book. Um, the other stuff is really there's a few things that were added. A few scenes were added, like Flass walking through the media, where the media is questioning him about his the allegations against him. The Jefferson Skeever scene in Gotham City PD, where his lawyers posting bail for him, not in the book, but it makes sense why they're adding these very short little sequences to have the story flow a little better. And those sort of things I think are necessary for live action, since it won't, as we know, comic books don't adapt perfectly to live action or animation, rather, in this point situation, rather.
What
Um,
did you think about the change from Bruce stealing the bicycle to, parkouring after moving vehicles?
yeah, that one is. I thought I have mixed emotions about that change. I At first I thought it was an improvement because I'm like, it's a bicycle. But at the same time, you're going to climb up a building and try to cut them off. But he knows the city so well. He knows which buildings he needs to scour the rooftops of to get an advantage or get ahead of the in the chase. Did you think that was a negative there, that he should have had the bike?
Hey y'all, it's Bill Ramey, founder of Batman on Film. Let's take a quick pause in this podcast for these words from our sponsor.
Yeah, I think so. It just when I was watching it, for this, it just felt like, why is he Like, how does he know which? Like, I get the concept of he knows the city so well,
Hmm.
and I appreciate that part of it. But it feels like even still knowing the city, he's not Batman. Like, he doesn't have his grapnel gun or any other means of like getting ahead. So like climbing up the building takes a lot longer. Like if he was in the costume and could rope around the city, I feel like I could accept it more
Hmm.
than the time it takes for him to get up the buildings. Like by then you're going to miss which direction they're going. So, but by the time we get to the bridge, it really doesn't matter because Gordon stops the vehicles anyways.
Yeah.
But it seemed a little ineffective.
I'd have to agree. It's one of those things you just unfortunately have to go with sometimes. Maybe they thought in the when they were crafting how they were going to tell the story, maybe they thought the bicycle looked a little silly. It's the only thing I can think of, but you definitely would have a better chance on the bike, I think, especially if he knows the city so well. He could take shortcuts and side streets or whatever that the cars couldn't get down. But that's fine. I just had to go with it. It's one of those things. You grin and bear it.
What did you think of the score by Christopher Drake, whose past credits included Injustice 1 and 2, Dark Knight Returns, Death in the Family, Arkham Origins, the Gotham Knight movie?
I'm glad you brought that up because that was another issue I had with the film that I forgot to mention earlier. I thought that it was noticeable in some places, and then but the majority of time it was kind of like carpet music or a carpet score where it's there, but it doesn't have any real significance. I thought that this, especially being year one, such a beloved story, needed a good musical theme. And
Mhm.
I've played music for over 25 years, and so that's what I notice most in any movie or television show. It can pull me into the show, or it can kick me out. There were a few musical cues that I did like. Whenever he summons the bats and they come crashing through the building, the music crescendos there, and it's powerful. And I thought that was great. And that scene, really adds to his legendary status. So I was most noticeable there for me. And then when Catwoman leaps out of the building in costume for the first time, I heard a hint of Danny Elfman's Batman Returns Catwoman theme or score. At least that's what it felt like to me, and I thought that was pretty neat. But overall, the unremarkable was how I would call the score. And music can make or break anything that you're watching. So that was my experience with it. What did you think?
No, I would have to agree with you. It's very unremarkable, compared to some of his other work. Like, I quite enjoy his Dark Knight Returns score.
Hmm.
I've got a few of the tracks of it that I, got on iTunes, and sometimes I'll throw it on while I'm reading a comic book.
Hmm.
But I didn't get that same feeling from this movie. I can't even recall any music from it really. I'm glad that
Yeah,
you were able to point out a few moments because to me it's more of just sonic wallpaper.
yeah, that's a good way to
That may
put
be
it.
a little too harsh, but um, it didn't capture me like some of his other work did. So I was kind of surprised when I got to the credits. I'm like, wait, but didn't he do this movie? Because it would have been nice if some themes had carried over between both films, since they are kind of tied because of the Miller aspect of it.
Right. Do you think that it would have benefited more from a score similar to The Long Halloween, which was very noir, and
Oh
they
yeah,
had the kind of the far away saxophones that you hear that you would kind of associate that with a 40s film, and in the everything about Long Halloween, capturing that noir aspect, I think works better in that movie than it does here. Musically is what I mean. Musically.
yeah. No, I definitely agree with you on that.
Yeah. That's definitely I mean, you could have you could have a band or a musician score this movie again and have a whole different feel, and sensation watching it. But that might be a little too disrespectful to the to the guy who scored it.
Something that struck me with this watch was, does it actually feel like a movie to you, or does it just feel like individual issues?
Hmm.
Does the narrative flow?
It's a good question. I didn't think about it that way. I would have to give it a rewatch to answer that question correctly and completely. But it hmm, that's a good. I think you stumped me there. Stump the rookie. That's the game we're playing right now, and you win. I think it flows for me. It flowed like a film. Did it flow more like individual segments to you, like 4 different chapters?
I don't think I can divorce my reading experience from the movie in this, because I kind of see this is the first issue, this is the second issue. And it's kind of like that for the Dark Knight Returns adaptation for me as well, except with that, because those issues are longer, they broke that movie into 2 parts.
Mhm.
So I kind of I feel that too, but to a different degree. Versus Long Halloween feels like there's more of a narrative to it than, like, there's a better flow to me, versus Year One, because of the dates,
Mhm.
that drives the story forward, because you're going through Year One literally.
Right.
And I don't know. To me, I see the comic breaks. Like, this is the end of issue 1. This is the end of issue 2. But it might just be because, I've read that comic so much.
Sure.
And being
What
one of those, like I said, one of those first graphic novels that I got when my collection was so small, like, I read it all the time. It's a miracle my copy is still intact. So,
You bring up an interesting point about Dark Knight Returns being 2 films. Long Halloween was 2 films. One of the critiques I read about this film is that it was too short. Do you feel that this could have used could have been broken up into 2 segments, or do you think it's short enough that one movie that's a little over an hour is enough for this material?
I don't really think you could add, 5 or 10 minutes to make every little piece in the book into the movie, but like I was saying earlier, it's such a taut narrative, and it moves by so quickly that
Mhm.
I don't think there's a lot to add to this. Like, I think it feels fine as it is.
Right.
I certainly wouldn't want them to go the Killing Joke route, where they make up a whole 30-minute extra story and tack it in weirdly to pad out the runtime.
Agree that
Um,
that was awful
yeah.
to me. Um,
Even if they stretched out, I mean, I suppose they could have gone and, like, stretched out some of the scenes, but and you mentioned a few moments, but I think for the most part, like, they're pretty much perfect the way they are,
mhm.
you
I
know?
I agree. I disagree with the critique that it's too short. I think I mean, the issues are what, 22 pages,
Yeah.
with ads. So you only have 4 of them. It moves pretty quickly, as you were stating earlier. It's just like, one situation after another.
I mean, the bulk of it, of, like, the 3rd issue is, um, in the abandoned building,
Mhm.
and, like, I don't feel like they shortchanged that sequence too
No.
much.
And
Did we get the Siamese mention in the
uh,
movie?
I'm sorry, say that again?
There's the part where, like, the cat gives him away. Like, do we even have, like, the dialogue in the movie about, like, "Oh, it's the Siamese, they never stay quiet"?
Oh, that's a good that I did not pick up on it if he said it that way or not.
Yeah, I don't remember either.
I will
Uh,
say one thing about this scene. When I read the individual issue, it was the only time in my entire history of reading comic books where I honestly read a book thinking, "I don't know how Batman's going to get out of this." And I remember specifically being almost nervous or frightened that they're going to catch him or they're going to kill him. Knowing there's another issue. So there's no point for me thinking that. But that's the only time I've ever been honestly stressed. Like, I don't know how to. And of course, he kicks the thing down and fights his way out and calls the bats and everything. It's great. But I just thought that was a well-written scene with him trying to get out of there.
Yeah, it's definitely very well done.
I don't mean to go on a tangent there. I just since you
No,
brought
no,
it
no,
up,
no.
I wanted to
Yeah.
include it.
Something else I wanted to ask you, do you feel that the climax, which is very faithful to the book outside of the bicycle part that we mentioned, do you feel like it's a big enough climax for a movie?
We were talking about extending scenes a second ago. This is probably something you could have, if you were going to take some artistic license and change it for the movie, here's probably would have been the best place to do it. Make it a little more suspenseful, draw it out, maybe a little, change the action sequence a little bit. It does kind of abruptly, it's quick and it stops and it's over. And I hadn't thought about that. You get some great questions, Javi. but
Thank you.
but yeah, I think it is a little short. It is a little short. If they were to be another critique, I would probably have to say that they could have stretched that or changed it, something along those lines. Do you feel it's too short, or do you feel it's appropriate?
I feel like while I appreciate the faithfulness for the most part to the book,
Mhm.
like when it comes to like a Batman climax, it's not really a Batman climax, but that goes back to, whose movie this really is.
Correct.
But when you think of like they're different mediums. So when you think of when they adapt things to movies, we'll take like Casino Royale,
Mhm.
the the most recent version of it, the 2006 film. Like they have like this whole elaborate fight in a sinking building in Venice versus the novel. He wins at cards but gets tortured and convalesces, and then Vesper commits suicide by overdose because of like her guilt. Versus the movie, it's this whole big thing. There's a shadow organization and money involved, and she gives herself up so he can get away, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So coming from that viewpoint of like movies have to make everything grand, they have to add the spectacle. I
Mhm.
don't feel we have the spectacle element at the climax for this. If you compare it to like the end of Batman Begins, where like where he's saving all of Gotham, like this is a very small scaled, more intimate conclusion. And it's great for like the Gordon arc, but I don't necessarily know how well it fits for Batman, other than it cements that bond between him and Gordon that we're going to see play out for decades to come.
I have to agree. I can't argue your point. It does not have that over the top, um, very dramatic end that you need. I mean, and it goes back to exactly what you were saying about whose story this is. Yeah, if there was one area to change for just for the movie, yeah, this would be it. You could almost call this Batman Gordon year one, or
Yeah.
Gordon Batman year one, or Gordon year one, that type of thing. It does lean heavily into his story more so than anything else. But I think that's just fine.
Is there any part of this you wish they would have done differently, or that you missed that didn't make it into the movie?
Hmm. No, it's pretty faithful. It's from as far as adapting the story from page to screen. I I, I don't think there's anything that I would have changed as far as that they didn't add. We mentioned the stuff about Harvey Dent earlier, but that would that's okay. Um, no, I mean, and unless you were going to make it a little more Batman heavy, but then you would change. It would change the dynamic a little more. Is there anything that's missing that you would add?
I mean, I'd be curious to hear another Batman voice actor.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Yeah, no,
But
no,
but
I agree with you there.
but other than that, and as much as I just said, like the ending doesn't necessarily feel movie big.
Mhm.
On the other hand, I don't know if I would change it either. I know I'm totally contradicting myself that it's too much like the comic, so I don't go back to it. But then if we stray from the comic, it's like, oh no, don't stray from
Yeah,
the comic. But I don't know.
yeah. The source material, as we were saying earlier too, it's so good. The slightest change would have people up in arms that are.
Right. Yeah.
And I did read some critiques like that. Some people stating you should have had it panel for panel, but that doesn't work the way they think it would if they did
Yeah.
it like that. Because they're two different mediums and they play out differently. You read at a certain speed versus you watch at a certain speed. It's
Yeah.
so but I'm with you. I would love to hear, a Kevin Conroy style or maybe even a Bruce Greenwood. He does a great Batman too.
Yeah.
And I really like his interpretation.
And it's one of those things in the multiverse. Maybe, Earth 89 me likes watches Batman Year One, the animated movie, more because the ending is different and bigger and bolder. So
Mhm.
we'll never know.
Well, like we were saying earlier too, with the some of the changes they made to Gotham by Gaslight. If you take that graphic novel, they included the Master. What was the sequel
Is
to
it
that
Master
one?
of Tomorrow?
Yes, Master of Tomorrow. Thank
Yeah.
you. They included that, and they changed who the killer was and that sort of thing. And that's one of the better interpretations, I think, of comic to an animated movie. Long Halloween, of course. I really appreciated the changes made in Long Halloween. Nothing against the original story because I love that, but
Yeah.
for the graphic novel, especially the identity of the killer in that one, I was really impressed, and I kind of saw it coming because of little hints that you saw beforehand, and I thought it was great.
Yeah,
So
it's
maybe
funny that that worked out the way it did.
have you heard any backlash from that film, specifically Long Halloween, as to the changes they made? People being angry about that?
Outside of Peter Vera, I don't think so.
Oh, Pete didn't like it.
No, I don't remember. I was just
Oh,
he likes to make fun of anything Long Halloween because of Lauer, so
oh, okay.
but I actually honestly don't know if Peter likes it or not.
Okay.
I don't remember. But, in terms of backlash for the Long Halloween, I don't really remember seeing any.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything about the changes they
Not
made. Like,
not like Hush. I feel like Hush was definitely more reviled when it came to the continuity changes.
hmm. Yeah, a lot of people are a big fan of that one. I'm wondering if they had made a change, a big enough change with year one, if it would have been people would have hated it or not. I'm with you though. There are definitely some areas where this could improve, especially if you were well familiar with the story, the comics.
What was your favorite moment from the movie?
I really the sequence where he has to call the bats and they broke through and the music finally kicked into high gear for that change. That gave me chills rewatching it for this discussion because basically I've been wanting a better, I've been wanting to hear something musically that really punctuate a scene, and that one did it really well, I thought. And I just wish there was more scenes like that that had music that powerful for the rest of the film. What about you? What was your favorite scene?
I really appreciated the bat crashing through the glass moment.
Mm,
It added a little bit of extra drama to it because they different from the comic where you control the pace. Like here, it was seeing someone else's interpretation of it. I just like that moment in general. Um, the whole ringing of the bells and Alfred being a gift from his father.
mhm,
And that's something that carries over into one of my favorite moments from Grant Morrison's run with The Return of Bruce Wayne. The iconography of the bell ringing and how the first rule of Bat or law of Batman is that he's not alone, you know.
hmm.
And if anything, this movie shows that he Batman may think he's alone, but he's always had Alfred, he's always had Gordon, he's always got that support system with him. And then just in terms of like changes, I think one of the funniest moments was Gordon and Barbara coming to visit Bruce, and he kind of flashes Mrs. Gordon. It
which
just
which
like
is not in
really
the book.
plays. Yeah, it's not in the book, and he really plays into it. The whole disgusting playboy aspect of it.
Yeah, I laughed. I kinda laugh every time I see that, but rewatching it for I'd kind of forgotten about it, and, rewatching it, I had the same experience. That was, pretty hilarious.
And then there's a line from his um, girlfriend, for lack of a better term, in the scene at the end where she's like, "You guys are weird. Just, you pay me $5,000 to sit here and drink grape juice with you."
What did you think about the inclusion of, the audience knowing that she was in on it versus the book where you don't know if she's in on it or if she honestly doesn't speak English?
I didn't mind it.
Yeah.
There were parts in I guess this was left out too, wasn't it? There's a part in the comic where he's skiing
You're right.
and he makes up, the whole he
Broke
talks
his
about the
legs.
alibi, how they're gonna pay people to say that they've seen Bruce Wayne here and hung out with him. So to me, it kind of adds to that. It was them having that,
Mhm.
but, tying it in more and, like, still having that moment, but not having that direct moment from the comic.
Right. I'd forgotten about the ski thing, but, I didn't mind so much that the girl was in on it and they showed you that she was in on it. Kinda made sense for the movie.
Yeah. What did you think of as we're starting to wrap
What
this
about the
up, what
never
did you
during the
think
day,
of
Alfred? Are you glad that line made
Yes.
it into the movie?
Yes, definitely. That was a good part too. As
I'm sorry
we
I talked over you there.
That's okay. As we kinda head towards wrapping this up,
Mhm.
what did you think of the animation style for this?
I
Did it
liked the
capture
animation.
Mazzucchelli for you?
Pretty close. Um, Not quite as gritty, but I noticed they did the best they could with it. I liked the overall aesthetic. There's a I don't know what the kind of color scheme, like sometimes it's a yellowish, sometimes it's a brown that kind of is almost over if you had a lens, it's kind of like covers it. And r- I recognize that from the book as I'm watching it. I liked the colors. I didn't have a problem with the animation at all. I thought it was great and pretty close, as close as we were going to get, I guess, unless Mazzucchelli came in and drew everything.
Yeah,
Your take?
in terms of adapting his style, I think both this and The Dark Knight Returns did as good a job as they could do given the budget they had,
Hmm.
in terms of capturing the look of the book. Like, I definitely saw even though it's not as detailed as his art, like, I definitely saw, like, the influence,
Hmm.
and, I mean, they straight up just used the graphic novel, it felt like, as storyboards. Like, there are definitely, a lot of similar panels compared to, like, screen grabs,
Oh yeah.
that I really like the look of it. I think in terms of the animation, it's one of the better ones. Um
Agreed.
I think like the Killing Joke fell short for me.
Me too.
For a lot of reasons, right?
The less I say about that movie, the better.
Yeah. And some of the other more popular adaptations, like they didn't even try. Hush obviously was keeping it more in that DC 52 style. Long
Yeah.
Halloween is more of the new um, house animation style they're going with the thicker line work.
Hmm.
And, there's not really a lot of Mignola in Gotham by Gaslight,
You're right.
which, you know, he's more of an eccentric taste, I feel like.
Uh-huh.
Not necessarily as mainstream, um, or something that maybe a general audience could get into. So I can see why they didn't go that way. And I haven't watched Doom Came to Gotham yet. I need to get on that. I keep forgetting about it.
I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. I did want to watch it, but it just slipped my mind after a certain amount of time.
Yeah. So as far as like being faithful to the source visually, I thought they did an excellent job capturing it.
Where would you rank this? Like or grade it rather? Um, you can. I mean, you don't have to compare it necessarily to the book. Just where would you grade this? What would you grade this as a animated Batman film?
See, it's really tough for me. 'Cause I feel like it is really good,
Hmm.
but it's not one that I terribly revisit a whole bunch. And I don't know if it's because of just I'm so familiar with the source material versus like Mask of the Phantasm I watch way more often than this movie. But even like Dark Knight Returns, like and I know that fairly well too, as well as I know Year One, but I feel like I watched that movie more than I watched this one. And maybe it just comes down to Batman.
Hmm.
Like there's more Batman's more obviously more present in Dark Knight Returns, and I also like Weller as Batman a lot more than Mackenzie as Batman.
Yeah. So
So while I think
rewatchability is a big factor for you.
yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Like rewatchability wise, it's kind of like in the B range, but just technically it's kind of like an A for me. If that makes sense. Because the story's really good, the animation's excellent.
Uh-huh.
But if I look at like some of the voice performances and the music, honestly, yeah, I'd have to just give it a straight B, I think.
Understood.
It's
I
good, but
gave it
not great for me.
right, right. I gave it a B plus A minus. I think there are a few minor improvements that we've talked about that could change things. And a lot of what I'm saying is like nitpicking that no one really has to change. But if you're going to do something based on a book, why not do just enough to give it its own originality? And I think that would have changed my overall perception of this, but I still like it. And I said earlier, and I'm not trying to contradict myself from earlier, that it is still in my top 5, top 10 Batman animated movies. It gets better when I watch it. And I'm more drawn to Gordon more than anything else in this, and that wasn't the case originally, and it certainly wasn't the case when I read the graphic novel or the issues. Um, but I like it. B plus A minus. Small changes would have helped. Mackenzie, nothing against him as we said earlier, but would have preferred a different Batman.
Yeah, it's one of those that, go back to an earlier point. It's like I don't revisit it much, but when I watch it, I'm like, oh, this is really good. So, one final question for you before we close out here.
Mhm.
Do you think they should have adapted years 2 and year 3?
Um, do I think they should have their own separate films, or should they have been adapted all into this story?
Separate films.
Well, year 2, a lot of that was taken, although loosely, and adapted into Mask of the Phantasm. I don't know that one would be. I think Mask of the Phantasm kind of tells that story a little bit better.
That's fair.
I like year 2, but I think that whatever influence they took from that book, I think they changed it for the better from Phantasm. Year 3, that would be an okay one, I think, to do an adaptation of. It's different enough. I don't know that it's been done in any animation before, or I don't think there's been a lot that's been taken from it and readapted into something, or adapted rather. Correct me if I'm wrong. Has year 3, has any of that been adapted before?
Not necessarily, because I mean it's the origin of Robin.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we've seen that in other animated series, but I
Yeah.
can't. The structure of year 3 is one of those ones that I love that comic so much,
Mm-hmm.
but it's apart because the way that the story's told. One of the things that threw me off with year 2 and year 3 as a kid was the pacing. Like I read year 1 first, so when I got to year 2 and 3, I expected it to be January 12th, March 16th, April 7th,
Mm-hmm.
June 21st, going through the whole calendar year, versus year 2 is more of a story that takes place during year 2. And year 3 it's like a framework, because it's a lot of how year 3 is impacting the current day,
Mm-hmm.
which is an interesting storytelling technique. But in terms of like trying to adapt it into a movie, it's so mired in what the death of Jason Todd did to Bruce
Mm-hmm.
and the ascension of Tim Drake. You would have to completely trick up the narrative in terms of adaptation. Like you couldn't do a 1-for-1, I don't think. You would have to completely restructure it,
What if you
or
added?
do it a 2-part movie.
I was going to ask, what if you add Lonely Place of Dying and sort of combined the two?
Yeah, if you did it like that, I think it would be a lot more feasible of a movie.
Because those happen back to back in the comics, right?
Yeah.
I think the Lonely Place of Dying picks up as the next issue, as they're introducing Tim Drake, if I remember correctly, from
Yeah.
436 through 440. No, 39, and then 440 starts with Lonely Place of Dying Part 1. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, I would
'Cause
love
then
to see that.
442 is him in the Robin suit on the cover.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which I have a copy of that signed by George Perez,
Oh, that's cool. That's priceless now.
as well as the one where it's got Dick Grayson looking at the Robin suit in the Batcave. It's one of those issues. I have that one signed by him too.
Oh, that's cool. Those are some of my favorite covers, that whole series. Like those, just year 3 and Lonely Place of Dying, those things just popped on the stands back in the
Absolutely.
day.
Yeah, I was so
Oh,
excited.
so
I remember the talk at the time. Everyone said that Dick Grayson was going to return to be Robin again. I was like, I don't think so. I knew something different was going to happen.
and different it did.
Yeah, true. Before we go, there were a couple Easter eggs. If you want me to,
Yeah,
talk about
let's
those
hear them.
real quick, just for fun. The Chrysler Building can be clearly seen when Gordon and Barbara leave the ultrasound appointment, which brings that connection of New York City being Gotham. I thought that was interesting. And then there are a lot of when Catwoman steals Loeb's toys, there were a lot of changes they made with other licenses they have. For example, one of the toys she's tearing up is Charlie Brown in the book, but you cut to the movie and she's tearing up the little cowboy marionette that Loeb has. She throws an Elmer Fudd doll. Holly's holding a Huckleberry Hound doll, and there's a lot of little things like that you can go in just in that sequence and see what all the toys that Loeb has in his office too. Like he has a
Yeah.
Boo Boo Bear from Yogi Bear. He has Boo Boo on his shelf. And if you look closely, there's a scene where Gordon walks in, and it looks like Loeb is playing with one of those removable cowl Batman figures, like the Mego style from the 70s.
Uh-huh.
He has it in his hand just for a brief second, and then it goes out of frame. And that's what it appeared to be to me. Just maybe a little Easter egg there. But I thought some of those were pretty fun to see. There's a lot of them, but I won't go into any more. But specifically looking at the toys that he has and when Catwoman steals them.
Yeah, I wonder if back in the day, like if they had to get any kind of clearance to have Mickey Mouse in the comic, or it was just
Oh, you're
it was
referring
the
to his
80s
phone,
and
right?
no one was caring. So it's not.
Yeah, because Loeb's phone was Mickey Mouse, if I remember
Yeah.
correctly. Yeah, you're right. I don't know. They definitely had to change it for the movie, of course. But they're using licenses they have, Looney Tunes and Hanna-Barbera characters.
I liked your note in your notes about the cowboy toy looking like Nixon and Woody, because I was trying to, when I saw it when I was watching it, I'm like, it looks kind of like Woody, but kind of like something else too, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And I think you hit the nose on the head.
Well,
Being Richard Nixon.
when I saw it at first, I kept trying to figure out if that was something in reality, like a version of Howdy Doody or something like that, but I couldn't find anything looking at old marionette pictures. And then, yeah, I thought I may have been stretching on that, but that's what he looked like to me with the nose being Pinocchio's, lying, the nose gets bigger, and have it being Nixon. I thought that maybe there'd just been a subtle jab.
Yeah, a little subtle political commentary.
Yeah.
Well, Patrick, I had a blast on this conversation. Lots of
glad.
good observations. It was fun to talk to you about this movie one-on-one. It's such a big, important story for Batman, both in any medium, really. Do you have any final thoughts about the film overall, or we pretty much covered it?
I think we pretty much covered it, but I really enjoyed talking to you too. You asked some great questions, and you had me stumped
Thank
a
you.
couple times, and I really enjoyed that, especially when it comes to Batman, because we all consider ourselves, we have our areas of expertise concerning the character. And I really wanted to do Batman Year One because it is definitely it's probably my favorite Batman story. The reason being is because it's, in my head, it's the closest to reality that I can imagine in a Batman comic book. There are lots of mistakes he makes. It's
Mhm.
gritty, it's realistic, there's mature elements to it. And that's why I appreciate it so much. And go back to a point I made earlier that when I really need a shot in the arm, I read this story again. So yeah, I had a blast talking about this one with you.
And Mazzucchelli's art it just gets more impressive every time I look at it. It's amazing to think that you don't really hear too much about his other work. I mean, I don't know when he stopped drawing, but it's like he did Batman Year One, did Born Again, created 2 eternal masterpieces, and then
Mhm.
just kind of I don't know where he went after that.
Yeah, I wish he could have done some more Batman. I like that Legends of the Dark Knight basically was an entire series that was influenced by this one story. You
Yeah.
know, from the type of art that you have to the type of storytelling, having him being solo Batman in his early days. So that was a lot of influences. This story has on live action movies and other comics. Uh, it doesn't seem to go away. It's still strong. I think it's sort of a timeless Batman. And there are some stories that are lumped with it sometimes that I don't think deserve. I mean, it's having trouble articulating, but I think it's the top, one of the top tier Batman stories. And some of the times put other stories with it that aren't on the same level.
Well, I think you're right, and I hope that we did justice to the story in the movie in this conversation. But I really enjoyed it, and I thank you so much for being with us today on Batmanimation. Where can
Sure.
people find you?
Well, Facebook is the easiest place. Instagram. I'm a musician, so my band is called the C Flats, THESEAFLATS, and I just released some little Halloween EP. If anyone is still celebrating Halloween this month, I kind of do it year round, and I know there are some other people that do, but they can find me there, and find me on every now and then on these podcasts, talking to unique people just like yourself.
And I think you were in a movie recently too, weren't
Oh,
you?
jeez. Okay, so for those that don't know, I live in Baton Rouge, and New Orleans, about 60 miles away, is known as Hollywood South, and there have been productions that started here about 15 to 17 years ago, and we get a lot of great movies to work on, and every now and then I'll be able to work on one, and I just recently was in The Killer on Netflix with you can see me in about a 30-second scene with Michael Fassbender delivering his dinner, and I get to stand in for a lot of actors and do photo double stuff because I've been doing it for a while, and it's a lot of fun. I would tell you, working in movies is you can't beat it. Even if you're a PA or if you're a background actor, if you have got great production with great people, it's a blast. And we're very fortunate to have that here in South Louisiana.
I'm looking forward to seeing it. I'm a big Fincher fan. We've been so we're still doing like holdover Halloween
Oh,
viewing
okay.
because we were working on our Halloween 4K box sets this year and the commentaries and special features, and we just finished The Fall of the House of Usher on Netflix last night, which has the aforementioned Bruce Greenwood
Yes.
as one of the main characters. And the Joker, Mark Hamill's in it also. So there's a lot of Batman and DC connections in that series, but that was a lot of fun. And now that we got that wrapped up, it's like, all right, we need to get to a few things before we officially start Christmas season movie watching. So The Killer's up there because
Are you gonna watch the Thanksgiving Eli Roth movie?
I need to.
I
I
heard
was
it's actually his best work.
That's what I've heard too. And we actually went to because they shot Grindhouse here in Austin.
Oh, nice.
So we actually went to the premiere
Oh, very good.
for that. Where the trailer came from was from that movie in between the Rodriguez and the Tarantino films.
Correct.
So it's cool that it's finally become a reality. And yeah, I definitely want to go check that out too.
Excellent. So, and then we got Thanksgiving tomorrow. So I hope you have a great Thanksgiving if you're one that celebrates that. I
Yeah.
don't want to, offend anyone that doesn't celebrate it, but it'd be nice to have a couple days off.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And just gonna hang out, eat some turkey, watch some dog show and parade, and probably read some comics because there's so many things to read. So
Yes, sir.
you can find me obviously here on BatmanOnFilm.com today, as of this recording, the day before Thanksgiving, November 22nd. You can go to BatmanOnFilm.com and find my review for Catwoman 59, which is post Gotham War. Brand new direction for the series, beautiful art, interesting premise for what Selina is doing after maybe dying at the end of Gotham War. I'll save no more, but definitely go out and pick up that book if you're not a regular Catwoman reader. Instagram, I'm the Bond is not enough because I talk about Batman and Bond and the Flash, Spider-Man, Superman, you name it. So you can follow me there, and we will have announcer Rachel take us out. Thank you for listening to another exciting episode of Batmanimation. Take care.
Thanks for listening to Batmanimation, a BatmanOnFilm.com podcast revisiting the animated TV and film adventures of the Caped Crusader. Follow Batmanimation on Twitter @Batmanimation. Follow BOF on Twitter @TheBatmanOnFilm. Follow Jet on Twitter at Batman on Film. For Jet and Team BOF, I'm announcer Rachel. Batman on Film, authoritative, definitive, the original, established in 1998.